We'll wait for a few people to trickle in, but I don't want to push it any further because it's already 6:50 and I tend to talk a lot. So thank you for being here. I'll give you a little bit of a summary of what we did. Can you reduce or the feedback is too much? And the previous talk. I spoke about art in the Madras region prior to 1850. So here in this context, 1850 in Madras is actually a kind of a marker in our art history where we go from all the art that existed in this region to when the college was established. And when the college was established, we switch from a very indigenous form of art. We kind of shed all the local knowledge, we shed a lot of local know-how, and we adopt what was a very European point of view. And I do not use, and last time I explained this, that I do not use the word colonial in my talk, or if I do use the word colonial in this lecture, it is not anything other than the fact that it was another center of power, another authority in the area. There are no overtones of colonialism in the sense that we were ruled by a people, because I have very opposing opinions on that based on the histories here. I believe that, and in that talk I did touch upon the fact that the European influence came into this region, and very specifically the region of Madras, the coastal area, give it about 100 kilometers this way and 100 kilometers that way, came in here through trade. It was never a battle that was fought for Madras. There was never a war. Like in Bengal, for example, there was a war between the last few Mughal kings and the British armies, and then they took over Bengal, and that's why you have the legend of Robert Clive and all of them. There were battles with the southern kings, there were battles with the Marathas, there were battles with the Nayaks, there were battles with some very few of the initial Nawabs of the Carnatic, who were the remnants of the Mughal empire who were ruling here. Just random facts, things like places like Mylapore, thanks Gopi. Places like Mylapore were very much a Mughal city. They have minted coins in the name of Aurangzeb, and the mint name is Mylapore, so they did come here. History teaches us that the Mughals did not invade south of the Vindhyas and so on. So anyway, so we looked at a larger history that started from the Roman contacts in South India, and particularly in the coast about 2000 years ago. We spoke about Mahabalipuram, the cultural impact and the visual impact of Mahabalipuram on this region. We touched upon Kanchipuram, and we touched upon a little bit of the southern Godavari Krishna Delta, which is at that point is still in its context part of Madras and Madras Presidency. So hopefully that video will be up on YouTube for you to catch up on and understand the earlier art history of this region. Today I'm going to be speaking very specifically about Madras and the school of art that was established here. Why is it important as a school? Because this was the first school of art that was established in all of present day India. So everything from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all the way down to Kanyakumari in what would encapsulate India at the time. This was the first time that a college of art or a formal institution for art was established. Prior to this, again, I had touched upon this earlier, there were artists who were traveling to Madras. So every time a ship would leave from England or anywhere in Europe, they would come aboard that ship to see either exotic lands, or 99% of the time they were hired as artists to come here and document these territories, because at that time obviously the greatest invention of all time didn't exist, which was the camera, and you couldn't capture what you were seeing. You couldn't translate images, because that's when you lose, like somebody describing what Madras, for example, to somebody in Europe would be fantastical ideas. So those artists came here to document. It helped with several things. It helped with making roads inland. It helped with mapping the area. It helped with creating a visual record of what they were seeing, and predominantly to take back images, right? So those artists, however, did not contribute to any kind of permanent establishment of an art culture in this region or in this city now. So what did happen was in 1850, and this part of history, most people who have studied in the college, there are a bunch of students here who are former students of the college, would all know the name Alexander Hunter. Now, Dr. Alexander Hunter, and the doctor part is important because he was a physician. He studied in Edinburgh, he was from Scotland, and he was a doctor, he was a surgeon. He trained there and he came to Madras because his father was also stationed here. So the interesting part is a lot of the people we speak about who contribute to Madras were not necessarily first generation people landing up here. Their fathers were there, or their fathers were part of the army, and it was, if the father served in India, the son is sent to serve in India. It's one of those things, right? And then you work your way up titles, you get honored, and you get merits and positions when you go back home after you've done your duty here. So Alexander Hunter comes here and he finds himself as a physician, and he is assigned just generally as the army doctor in Blacktown. Blacktown is today's Georgetown, and that's where pretty much all of Madras existed as a city, as a part of the East India Company's infrastructure, right? Fort St. George existed, and everything behind Fort St. George is what was Blacktown. If you guys want my theory on the name Madras, it's debated many, many times over, but Madras Pattinam was the city just north of the fort. So when they came here, they knew that there was something called Madras. It's not a mysterious name. The British themselves document, East India Company documents that they came and arrived and built the fort south of Madras Pattinam. So everything above, north of the fort was Madras Pattinam, everything in the fort was the fort and the East India Company, and everything which is Georgetown today and further inland from the fort was known as Blacktown, or eventually Georgetown. So, so he was there, he was residing there, he was working, he had a private practice and he had his government role. But the government role, obviously, at that point in 1850s, there was no active war, there was nothing going on, and he was stationed here, and I suppose only casual wounds and probably a lot more of the malaria and jaundice and such things would what he would be treating. Now, while he was here, and obviously having all this free time, doctors apparently, and this is something interesting that I've discovered, which also leads to a larger connection with other people in this story, doctors who had to graduate as physicians had to take art as one of their prerequisite courses, because you had to do anatomy. You had to, again, photography has not been invented. You couldn't take a picture of the patient, or you couldn't take a picture of what you were operating on. So doctors had to draw, and surprisingly, even today, a lot of doctors that I know can draw. A lot of doctors are very good artists. It just seems to be, as if you have that kind of a brain, you can also do this. It's some kind of part of the genetic coding to do that. But he was a very good artist. He had to learn how to draw so that he could document all the anatomy, the surgeries, the wounds and whatever, so that, because in those days, to give you a backdrop of the world at that time, which is also important and which is what you're seeing here in this picture, is the world is just starting to figure out that they are in what is called the Industrial Revolution, right? So here's the doctor who is looking at the influences of this Industrial Revolution, who's a good artist himself, who's in Madras. And interestingly, Madras functioned not as a colony somewhere, and see, that's the difference. The reason why I don't consider ourselves a colony is because we didn't function like some forgotten land, like somewhere else in maybe Sumatra or a random island somewhere who was just being exploited for resources. We were functioning with a government, with an administrative system. So at that point, we mirrored the metropole. Metropole basically is the center of power, which was England and particularly London. We were mirroring that here. They were getting daily newspapers or whatever, 1 month old newspapers with daily news. They were discussing between the two places. They were starting to replicate whatever happened in England was being replicated here, which is why if you see the older parts of Madras, they are constructed in a very planned way, right? You have the fort, and then you have the railways connecting there, you had the hospitals being built there, eventually the museum, everything was connected in the older parts of Madras. So, and similarly, if you look at old Madras, old Calcutta, old Bombay, and then look at London, they all look very similar and are structured very similarly. So everything was happening simultaneously and contemporary to what Dr. Alexander Hunter was experiencing. Now, the Industrial Revolution, of course, is I will talk about it next week a little bit more in detail, but it's the whole reason that why mankind decided to explore the idea of being modern. The modernist idea or modern thought is a product of Industrial Revolution. How is it important to the art world? Very simple. It shifted power, wealth and decision making from the rulers and the kings who were centers of power and wealth to industrialists and businessmen and people who were trading and guys who owned fleets of ships and guys who were importing pepper and silk and merchants, and they started to become rich and had a say. And they said, wait a minute, we want to be modern, we want to have the best, we want to think differently, we want to change government. So all that happened, and that effect trickled down, and obviously Alexander Hunter is having this thought. So what he does, very interestingly, 1850, he jumps the gun. He sets up the college. It's only in 1851 that the exhibition, the Great Exhibition, happens in the UK, right? So the Great Exhibition of 1851, I will get to, but sorry, I skipped obviously. This is Broadway. This is pretty much what it would have looked like, Broadway and Blacktown and so on. This is a weirdly colorized black and white photo, probably taken in the 1860s or so, but this is what Madras would have looked like where the school was set up in 1850, where Dr. Alexander Hunter was. The school was not set up where it is today. It was in his house on the first floor, and it would, so imagine, I just assume, imagine this was his house and that's where the college was, or any of these double-storied buildings. I chose those pictures specifically for that because it also gives you an idea of the kind of a structure that the college when he started, or the school that he started, would have looked like, because we all imagine the college to be the current building, which is also an old building, built in the 1890s, a nice brick building. So when Alexander Hunter, and that's him, probably the only photo, for some reason those days, obviously, I mean, they didn't have multiple photos, but this is the more famous picture of Dr. Alexander Hunter. This is what he looks like. This was probably taken in the 1870s or so, when he was retired, when he was not actively running the school. This could have been taken when he was back in England. He does go back to England and Scotland and retires there. But this was in 1851. So this man, his thought process was on par or slightly ahead of what they were thinking in London. They were saying we have to showcase all the arts and crafts of our entire empire, which is industrially driven, because the Industrial Revolution was all about production and mass production and commerce, and think of this as a trade fair of today. Like if you go to home decor exhibition, or if you go to lifestyle and jewelry fair, it was one of those kind of things, except it was a gift for Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert at the time decided that he would put up this exhibition for his wife. What we again need to understand at that point, if you can look right at the top on the left, you'll see like lines and it looks very transparent. They built a glass structure. They not like a small little glass room. They built this entire convention hall, which is as big as any of your trade centers that you would visit today, thousands of square feet, 3 stories tall, entirely with a metal structure fabricated, and then glass panels all around it so that you could visit this. And they had this exhibition up for about 6 months, like the art fairs, right, or the art fairs of today. And they brought in everything, and of course India being their most prolific and product driven colony, because this is in perspective of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. This colony of theirs was producing the maximum amount of things. So the entire fair, like 50% of it was stuff coming out of India. And they would have had like stuffed elephants, the entire, you know, all the, from cloth to materials to raw materials to artworks to, you know, metalware and terracotta and whatever you could think of across the country was curated. Alexander Hunter was part of the South Indian committee to select things. There were people in Bombay, there were people in Calcutta who were all bringing things together. That's what drove the idea towards setting up the rest of the colleges, because the exhibition was very successful. The whole world saw it, and literally all the Maharajas from India, all the kings from wherever in the world who were under British territory traveled here. Like they go to the art fair in Basel. They all went there, they all, you know, looked at each other, they saw what was happening, they all said, okay, I'm going back and I'm starting this museum and this college and that school, and, you know, my state is going to produce X amount of things. We have very good craftsmen, like the Jaipur Maharaja would have said, you know, we have a lot of woodwork craftsmen, we'll do that. Or, you know, in Kutch they said, we'll make a lot of silverware, and, you know. So each Maharaja went back and all of this frenzy was going on. Luckily, Alexander Hunter had started the institution and he called it the School of Art. Now, this is the only art that I could actually find from the School of Art from 1850. This is I don't know if he was a teacher or a student, it's still very fuzzy, but this was a guy called Fonseca, and he was obviously the only art student, you know, because when it started, while it was called the School of Art, they were actually very far from art the way we see it on our walls here. Their idea was to take craft, and their idea was to take a lot of guild-based production. So if you're a potter, if you're a carpenter, if you're a carver, if you're, you know, he brought them together. So this is the only example of actually art or painting that I can show you. But this is what they were making first. The most random objects that you could think of. This is a stoneware telegraph insulator. Right. So when you think of School of Art and how it started, they were not sitting there and painting lovely pictures, right? Alexander Hunter, being a doctor, put this together and said, okay, some guys can paint and draw, and, you know, we have people who are doing that. But most of the things, his entire manifest was he wanted to improve the quality of traditional production in this region so that it could be made to a certain standard where you can then improve the livelihood of the natives. Again, definition of natives, I do not mean Europeans versus Indians. Natives were people in this region, because you had third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation Europeans here who were natives at the time, right? Because they were born here, their grandfather was born here, and all they knew was India. They probably would go to Europe for their education, they would come back here, they'd probably go get married, they would come back here. So when he says natives, he did not necessarily mean the local indigenous population. He probably also meant natives when, you know, involving everybody who lived in this city, because the idea of native in Madras, there's no native. Everybody came into Madras 300 years ago and the city developed, right? So his agenda was to improve the livelihood and the quality of production here so that it could be sold and the natives of this region would benefit from it. So he kept sending this to, and if you can see that it says Industrial Museum of Scotland. Right? So even the museums there in Europe, predominantly in the 1850s when they were being put up, were also thinking in lines of industry, because the exhibition was the great exhibition of art and industry. And the whole focus went to industry because industry drives commerce. Commerce gives you revenue, that revenue can be used to support the arts, right? So, and that little hand with the eye, you know, it's kind of like an Illuminati symbol. That was Alexander Hunter and the director of the Industrial Museum of Scotland, who was also a doctor who decided to start this museum and run this museum there. They came up with that logo, and you'll see it says Alexander Hunter, Madras, 1859, right? So about 8 or 9 years after he starts the school, they are very proud of what they're making. They make these kind of things. They also make, and thanks to somebody here in the crowd, they also made this. They made bricks. They made It's fascinating. As I said, you think they were making art. It was called the School of Art. It was called the School of Industry. But they were making bricks like this. These were being used to build everything in this region. They were. So why do they make bricks? Because there is a huge know-how of brick making around this region. So they were making bricks in Chetpet, they were making bricks in Chengalpet, they were making bricks all over this area, and he said, I will teach you how to make a better mold, how to fire it better, how to make, so if you see there are two different, one is terracotta fired, the other one is a salt glazed, almost like a ceramic brick, right? So it's like a very durable, very hard brick. You can use it for exterior purposes. So that's why it's that brick, it's these bricks that the college was later built with. Almost every old building of Madras that you see along Marina Beach and the railway station and Victoria Hall, and everything was built with these bricks. Clearly they branded some of them for the school, but it also generated revenue, right? Because the model that Alexander Hunter came up with, and now I will come back to Alexander Hunter and the school itself, the model he developed was he would split the school into two. He first had the School of Art and the School of Industry. He clearly separated them. The School of Industry would make these things, create a revenue, not just for the artist, but for the school itself, which would then pay for and subsidize the School of Art. And the School of Art, students could come in, he charged 1 rupee a year or something like that, and then you would sit there and learn how to draw and paint, and obviously the technical skill didn't exist here, because as I told you, there's only one person, Fonseca, whose name comes up as both an artist and a teacher of art in the school. It would have been a very basic level. The curriculum was not based on the Royal Academy. The curriculum was not based on any particular format from the European academic system. But once he set it up and he figured out this revenue model, he figured out income generation for the school, he realized that the place was not sufficient. He can't run a college on the first floor of his house. So what he did was he formed a committee, right? And this committee included more doctors from Scotland who were all up to other things in this city other than being doctors. And he got hold of this gentleman whose painting you can find at the Madras Museum. This is from the Madras Museum, Dr. Edward Green Balfour, who had another brother who was Captain Balfour. Both of them were very influential in Madras in the, basically they had good relationships with the governors of the city. A governor, I don't mean a single head like the governor today. Governors were people who were appointed by at that point, not yet the East India, not yet the British Crown, but the East India Company, and they would be the ones who will say, okay, I'll approve your funds, or I'll approve this, or we'll sanction that, or we'll give you land, and so on. So this committee was formed. One of them was Edward Balfour, and the other person was Hugh Cleghorn, who nobody would probably recollect. Does anybody know who he is? He was another doctor from Scotland. So obviously all these Scottish gentlemen were doing things, but he is the gentleman who is single-handedly responsible for horticulture. Horticulture Society, which is near the US consulate. The Semmuri Punga today was part of what he did, and almost all of Saidapet was his horticultural farm. They used to have the government farm there, they used to grow everything, and he basically, if it was not for him, there would be no documentation of the flora and fauna of pretty much the entire Madras presidency. So since they were friends, since they formed committees, they basically figured out how do we help each other, and it's people like him who said, okay, I need an artist who can draw this plant. You know, and Balfour is like, okay, I'm starting a museum, I need an artist who can help me create furniture for my museum. So it was a lot of this immediate requirement, a lot of this industrial requirement that they got together and did. Again, it's fascinating, they're all doctors, there's no real theory, I'm just kind of trying to figure out and say, you know, bunch of doctors sitting here and creating Madras's. It doesn't come from the typical space you would think of, right? Madras's history didn't come from art teachers and art patrons, but from 3 or 4 doctors, all from Scotland, who obviously were very passionate about this city and documenting it. So this was the output of what the school did on the request of Dr. Cleghorn, because This is how they started documenting all the flora and fauna. Last time I spoke about how the Nilgiris Library, or the Nilgiris Library Uttakamund, has the best collection of these actual drawings and aqua tints and colored prints. The librarian there, who's now retired, the only way she could stop people from tearing and stealing books was to stamp everything. So she has stamped a lot of precious artwork with the library's name, and which is why I couldn't get a single picture without the library on it. But if you notice right at the bottom, I'm sure it's very blurred, but it's written in Tamil, Telugu, here English, and cut off at the bottom I think is a kind of Urdu, Telugu of course, and these were done by artists that they brought from the larger region. So you had a lot of traditional art practice here. It's not like nothing existed. So you had painters from the Nayak school, so people who were working in Trichy and Tanjavur and Kumbakonam, artists who do Tanjore paintings, or artists who were painting temples. So they were bringing people from there who had a certain inherent skill, and they were teaching them European ways of interpreting, academic ways of interpreting how to draw, and teaching them how to make these scientific studies, right? Because if you took an artist who was painting a Tanjore painting, he's not going to detail of noting the with accuracy how the petal looks and how the, you know, the whatever you call the veins on the leaf are and how the leaf looks, right? Because this had to be partly scientific. That's why it took doctors, you know, to figure out the science behind these things, but these were documents. So it's fantastic. It's about an 8-volume book that they have at the library of original drawings of all the flora and fauna of this region. So and today it is one, so it's all, the original sets are back in Edinburgh, and some of the biggest research on any kind of bio species that you need in this region is done there, and in fact a lot of the research in our biopreserves like Silent Valley and all that is highly dependent on the archives that are now back in Edinburgh, and a product of the School of Art here, the industrial school. So this is giving you a sense of what's happening, and then I'll jump into what is actually going to happen. This picture, the subject of this picture has nothing to do with the talk, but the medium, and this is what changes everything in the world, everything. 1850s, the camera is invented, right? By 1845, 1849, you have versions of the camera, and by 1850, you have a very sophisticated camera system, which were these large bellows, and they had glass plates and negatives, and it became highly produced and highly available. And when they were released in Europe, 6 months later, they were here in Madras. So by 1851, 1852, photography became the primary course taught at the college, right? Because if you think about it, it was the NFTs of those days, right? Like some crazy guy figured out how to put every artist out of work. You didn't need, imagine if they had this, the guy didn't have to sit and draw every flower and every building and every, you know, document these things. So the camera came in, and every effort was made to get the state-of-the-art photography to the college here. By 1855, the Madras Photographic Society, which still exists till today, it's one of the oldest societies that exist, was formed. It was a group of, and like now, photography wasn't limited only to specialists. People were bringing cameras. There were individuals who were bringing cameras. They were going out there, shooting things, pictures all over the place. But the college was teaching natives, very much Indians as the local population, how to use cameras, and that's why the college is the best repository, visual repository of anything you want to know from the 1850s to about the 1900s, right? This is spectacular in itself because this is a photograph of the Tanjore Palace. If you go there today, you will only see like 3% of this, because over time it's been painted, whitewashed, removed. That statue, all that you'll see today is that statue without the hat. The hat actually was carved by the sculptor as a removable thing. So somebody's obviously removed it, not put it back, and the base of it, you can see now it's kind of hidden and painted grey in color, but you could see that that was apparently the throne base of the Vijayanagar king who originally built this palace. So that when the Maratha kings took over, they put the Maratha king statue over the throne base of the Vijayanagar king. So like power move, right? It's like when Secretariat made and then this chief minister removes that chief minister's work. And then you can see a collection of phenomenal paintings. There are canvas paintings displayed at the bottom, right? There are fans over there. There is the entire mural stucco work that's documented. Look at the crystal chandeliers. They're coming in from Europe. This is like state of the art. And all of this was captured because of photography. And photography is like, it has done wonders to art. It is in fact, I mean, globally it killed art, right? There was no need for an artist to paint anymore because you could take photographs and you could duplicate them very easily. You didn't have to worry about paying huge amounts of money for an artist to spend his time and paint something, right? He didn't have to, like those portraits there could have been done in one day and you could have 20 copies and send it wherever you want, right? It's not going to cost you 25 days or 30 days of an artist sitting there and working. This is another wonderful example of what photography came in and did. And look at the quality, and this was being taught at the college. They were being taught how to light and capture, and it's not easy. I mean, it's not a click and shoot. It is far more of a setup. They've obviously put two people. This is the palace, the Tirumala Nayak Palace in Madurai. It doesn't look like this whatsoever. Obviously, they've set it up. They've brought in furniture. They've brought in things. They brought in a couple there to pose. So now you know why it was a college, right? They were teaching you composition. They were teaching you, like this is not somebody's house. Those people don't live there. That's the Tirumala Nayak Palace, right? But how to set up, how to create perspective, how to shoot with a dead center, you know, it's a very symmetrical composition. So all of this was being taught, and that's why you were getting, and by the way, these pictures are from the collection of the college, which again do not exist anymore in the college. They have deteriorated. Thanks to international museums who took the effort, they scanned these. And then I'm going to go through a series of photos. It's no longer about the photos, but now it is to show you what was being made in the college. That entire contraption there looks like a giant boiler, and to give you scale, he must have been the teacher or the professor or whoever at the time. They were making these giant copper, boilers, and you can see how they have dressed the craftsman who's doing it. He must have been a metal worker. He must have had knowledge on how to make copper, and they're teaching him how to make copper vessels so that he would then produce these standardized industrial products. This is one of the earliest non-industrial products, but produced on an industrial scale to come out. So this is from 1860s. This is what they were making. I don't think, I've never seen one physically. I think there is one in the Jaipur Museum, but I'm not sure it's from this period, but this is what they were making. This again was, everything that was made here, the good thing is everything that was made in Madras, Alexander Hunter kept sending few pieces to his friends in Edinburgh, and there they kept them beautifully and they've preserved them, and you can actually go see them there. But they were making these vases. Now you can see them bringing together the idea of, say, a very, you see the colors, the blues, the whites, the greens, they're from the entire traditional Indian palette, right? They're very dark, they're very saturated colors. They're not the very plain white, paisley, pastel colors of what you would see coming from China or what was being made in Europe. So these were then being sent to England, and people were buying these because they were decorative pieces. They were not purchased, they were not very expensive, they were not works of art, they were decorative pieces. So they would be what you buy at the home store or whatever today, and you would put them up. Of course, they came from India and this. So they started getting hold of various craftsmen, right? Because now that's why it's called the School of Art and Craft. So this again, the time period still is in the 1860s. We have not moved too far from when the college was started. This is documented as copper and that's an ivory piece, but they were made by a student who studied at the college, but he was from a crafts guild in Tanjore. So he brought his know-how and his skill set here to the college, and then they sat together and said, why not make a plate? Why not create a certain quality? Why don't we work with other metal departments or other metal workmen in the college, use the lathe? Right? So all of this is possible, the perfect symmetry, the perfect circle, the depth of the repose, all of that is possible only because they had lathes in the college, they had a little bit of, power tools of those days, right? They could make those pots in a lathe rather than make it out of hand and beat them. They would put them on this lathe and then fold the copper around it and create the shape. They would probably have used, for the ivory, they would have probably to give it again the quality of finish, they would have probably used what is the power saw of those days, where there's actually 3 guys on this side and 3 guys on that side, but it was much easier to cut through rather than one person sitting in those days. They used like a bow and thing to create drill bits and saws. This was a little bit more industrial, and then you can see they've put a scale to give you measurements and so on and so forth. What is just a random fact is, if you see the dancers on that one, the Kolatam dancers, right? So interestingly, there's a little urli here which has those same dancers. So it's fascinating that we're able to. People have forgotten; they don't know what was made then. So after a long time, I discovered that there is a product of the college. I found it randomly in Mood Market. So they caught hold of carpenters, they caught hold of people who could carve wood, and they started to make and these were again, you know, the source of inspiration comes from Trichy and Madurai and all the temples where you will see this carved in stone. These were probably originally designed in the 16th century or 15th century, but they have come back, looked at this and carved it in wood and started to make these into cabinets, into cupboards. This is actually a small little bookshelf. I've just cropped it to see the detail, but this is just a bookshelf. Imagine a bookshelf that has one corner of it carved this well. So they were starting to focus on quality, right? So they were getting all this quality out of, and that's a huge task. We all struggle with getting quality out of any kind of production, nowadays, but they were managing to do this. Look at this. This is just a back of a cabinet, and they were using images from India. Again, the end buyer was not Indian, the end buyer was a European in Europe, but they were using the images here. They were trying to get as much quality as possible. Look at the intricacy. So what they did was, this carving technique is not native to this city or this state. They were bringing in carvers from Kashmir, they were bringing in carvers from Rajasthan, they were bringing in carvers from all over the world. Now that connection started to work. So they say, I'll bring a master craftsman, he becomes your teacher. You work apprentice under him. You work for 5 years, 6 years, learn how to do this, maintain this quality, then you have 5 students under you. So they ran them like workshops, they ran them like literally like a factory and not a school, right? I'll show you some images later which will give you the idea of how they did it. This is not Subodh Gupta, this is again production from the college, right? So they were making these. I mean, look at them today. We still utilize a lot of these things. A lot of these shapes were first designed here. You didn't, with the little lip to pour or the handles or the stackability of them. I don't know what the things are at the bottom, but clearly they were using aluminum. They brought in new materials. So that was the introduction of new materials, right? So aluminum was just being introduced. Surprisingly, it's existed since the 1860s, 1870s, but aluminum was very big. And you also wonder how in this city, what do we use? Why do we use this? We all say we use a Davara tumbler. I don't think a Davara tumbler came into existence much before this period, right? What we drink coffee with. Or a filter coffee itself, because the filter had to be made as a contraption. So maybe it's only after these things were marketed that we start to use a lot of things. So they do have impact on our day-to-day culture. They're just making lotas, So as I said, this building still exists there, by the way. It's on the side of the sculpture department. It's there are walls built into it today. But so just to also give you the idea that the college was not about fancy paintings and making art, it was about creating high quality product, and that in itself was the art form or the quality, creating purposeful use. This is how the college looked like. It was bunches and bunches of people. They were not labor. They considered these people as students, right? They're not just random people sitting here and working, and they would go back home, and they're not daily wage labor. They were the students. They were being taught how to do things. That's the lathe I spoke to you about. You see how it's now almost like a system. It's all of them running at the same time. These guys can utilize them. They're being taught. There are multiple communities. There are mixed communities. You'll see some people wearing the sacred thread, some people not. The different types of headdress, the different type of clothing. It all indicates that this was a multicultural, multi-religious, social group of people who came here to use their skill to make a living and to be able to learn a craft which they could use to then go ahead with. Now, we move now into roughly the 1890s when Alexander Hunter has left. He's retired, he's left, the college has been taken over by the government. The government initially funded the college. In the 1860s and 70s, the government funded the college, they gave the land, but by the 1880s and 1890s, they decided that they would completely take over the college, and they created a new system. The system that they created was that there would be a superintendent of the college, and then there would be two principals. There would be the principal of the School of Art, and there would be a principal of the School of Industry. And so that's why when we read, we'll hear some people were superintendents, some people were principals, but that was the hierarchy. So there was one guy up on there, and then there were two people who were taking care of the day-to-day functioning. The superintendent was pretty much an administrative head, and he was the guy giving you approvals and speaking to the government and doing things, and then the principals were the ones who are in charge of the day-to-day operations and teaching you. So by that time, a few more British gentlemen come into the college. Some of the more famous ones I will talk about, but they now start to bring in academic training. Now they have students who are being taught how to draw, but they're being taught how to draw for industrial production. They're being taught how to draw for documentation. So this is not something that was drawn to be produced, but this was to document a particular type of vase that was coming from a particular region, which belonged to the collection of the museum that was inside the college. So now you see that their vision is becoming larger and larger, right? So the Madras Museum is there, they need people to document their collections. The college has its own museum, they need people to document that. Photography is great, but obviously at that time you couldn't do macro photography, you couldn't capture this level of detail, and you couldn't then translate this into a publication. They couldn't print books in those days, which were just photographs that were reproduced. Coffee table books could not be made in those days. So if you wanted to print a book, you need people to be taught how to engrave, how to draw, how to print. So they were teaching all these things. So the product, what we're seeing here is just what looks like a simple drawing is actually a guy who was being taught printmaking, a person who was being taught how to draw, a person who was being taught how to etch, a person who was being taught how to bind a book. All of this was happening in the college. Today, I mean, some of it that people learn is remnants of this. In fact, some of the equipment that the college still has was what was brought in at this point of time. So in the museum, what is the museum today, at the very end, there is a giant printing press that they cannot seem to move out of there, which was brought in like the 1880s. And I'm very sure that this book and this print was printed on that same press. And even today, a lot of the equipment that they use is from this period. Look at this. This is, again, it is a drawing made into an etching, made into a print, put into a book and published. This is something I have zoomed in to show you, but this was them documenting a gold plate. They had made gold plates in the college, and look at the level of craftsmanship. I'm sure the actual object looked like this, and I'm sure that the artist was able to, fairly truthfully reproduce what was going on. So they were doing things like this, and this is one of the later projects by another principal when they introduced textiles into the college. Why is this relevant for today's talk and for this exhibition is you see batiks hanging over there, and that was an outcome of a very early time when they introduced textiles. And how did they introduce textiles? By documenting the local weave, because by the early 1900s, the entire weaving industry was fading out of here. You know, the East India Company came to Madras for the weaving, for the textiles. That is what they exported from here. And by the early 1900, like 1900, 1910s, that whole production was leaving this area. So the college brought back textiles, weaving, printing, block making, and this is from, it's called the Ponneri wood block, because Ponneri, again, which is Pulicat, which is about maybe 60-70 kilometers north of Madras, was famous for block printing, right? And obviously the Dutch set up their fort there because they were exporting printed textiles from here. So they started doing this, documenting it, and beautifully made an entire book on all the block prints that were ever made in the college, and the principal then documented that. Now, at this point of time, there is another gentleman who I am not going to show you visuals, not of the gentleman, neither of what he did, because it will be interesting for you to discover this on your own. The point of us running a gallery is to get people to engage with art. The point of us having museums and buildings in the city is for people to go and engage with them. So there was a very important principle, and this guy is the person. So if you took Alexander Hunter as one turning point of art in the city, the next person who is a phenomenal contributor is Robert Chisholm. Now Robert Chisholm again comes in here as he's a fully trained architect, trained in the UK. He comes here and he's appointed to build public buildings. So one of the first few things that he does is and all the famous buildings here, he builds the Senate House. He builds part of the railway station. He builds part of the one extension of the Madras Museum here. He builds the building at the college. While he's principal in 1890 something, he decides to build what they refer to now as the painting section. He builds that building there. And his contribution, because he was the principal of the college and that was his route through following his profession as an architect, he utilizes everything in the college. And if this city has anything of architectural history, it's because of him, and that's what we see today. Stained glass windows, right? So he brought in stained glass technique from France, from the French stained glass makers there, and that's why every building in Madras at that point had stained glass windows. It's all gone now. I don't know. You can see them at the Connemara Library in the museum. If you go to, if you get permission, you can go in. It's the most spectacular dome, and that was a Robert Chisholm extension, the Connemara Library. And or if you want to see good stained glass, you can go to the museum and go into the armory section. The armory section still has all the stained glass over there. If you want to further sneak in, and you can go to the government college, and there is only one tiny room left where they have a Lakshmi and a Saraswati which were done, and that is the rarest, that is the holy grail of the college, because that's where they store all the things that they don't want you to see, literally. And luckily copies of it exist elsewhere, but there's a beautiful Lakshmi and Saraswati there. So Robert Chisholm, and if you look at Senate House, for example, and okay, to give you a background on what he did, he took what he thought was Indian design. He took Mughal architecture, he took European architecture, and he literally married them together. So all his buildings will look part Islamic and part European. But if you look at them closely, and I don't know how many of you have actually gone there, done this and seen this. If you go to Senate House, for example, from the road, do you know, all of you know where Senate House is? Do you have a visual reference? Do you know Marina Beach? So if you go down the beach, there is this red color building that looks like a, you know, Mughal building. It's opposite the MGR memorial. So notice it. You can't miss the building. If you notice the pillars all around the building, it will actually have statues of gods and goddesses that look like they are from our temples. It's the most unexpected things you will see. So that was his beauty. He used stained glass, but he put Lakshmi and Saraswati and Rama, and he took all the images from the region and put them into his architecture, which was a mix. And ever since then, all over India, right, it is Robert Chisholm's influence of architecture. So from the 1890s all the way to like 1950s even, all the buildings are his inspiration. Like it's him and his students and his followers who kind of build most of India. He also built the Baroda Palace. So the palace in Baroda today is the ultimate Robert Chisholm example, and even there he uses bricks from the college, he uses stained glass from the college. He put all the guys here, you know, into good work, and they're the ones who built the palace. So I want you to explore Robert Chisholm for yourself. I don't want to put him up here, but after that, by the 1910s, 1920s, the institution itself is 70, 80 years old, right? And anything that's become that old starts to have problems of itself, starts to have deterioration, starts to have stagnation of ideas. So, and of course, by the 1920s, early 1920s, 30s, India's very vocal about independence. India is starting to discuss the idea of some kind of self-governance, some kind of freedom from the British rule at that time. So all these institutions started to appoint Indians for the first time. Like in Bombay, you had Dhurandhar in I think 1920s, who was the first principal of the Indian principal of the college. Calcutta had Abhindranath Tagore in 1911, who was the first Indian principal of the college. And so in Madras, they introduced a gentleman, this gentleman, Devi Prasad Roy Chaudhary, as the principal of the college, and which point he becomes the principal of the entire. He comes in and changes the curriculum and says there is no more two colleges, it's just going to be the Government College of Arts and Crafts, right? And that's when it goes from being the School of Art, School of Industry to becoming this one school. And he is a product of the Bengals, of the Calcutta school. So he studies under people like Nandalal Bose, Abhindranath Tagore, and his predecessor to his position, E. B. Havell. E. B. Havell is a nationally important figure because he creates a lot of galata in Madras and in Calcutta. He's the British guy who's saying Indian art is better. Indians should be doing Indian art and not painting European art. So he found a lot of fan following with Roy Chaudhary and Abhindranath Tagore and Rabindranath Tagore and Nandalal Bose and all those guys. So he trained academically under these gentlemen who were, one was Rabindranath Tagore. You can imagine, you know, if you're leading a freedom movement, you're a poet, you're a theatre person, you're looking at Abhindranath Tagore, who's principal of the college, Nandalal Bose, who's, you know, eventually illustrating your constitution, and he's painting Gandhi's posters. When Gandhi went to on his freedom rallies, it was Nandalal Bose who was painting the posters. So he's their student. So he comes here and brings in the entire academic style based on the Calcutta school, and Calcutta school was based on the Royal Academy. So he brings in the academic style, and with him you kind of start to phase out the industrial production. There is no more emphasis on ivory carving and wood carving and metalware, and they're not making insulators and they're not making, you know, bricks and so on. But here he says we're going to focus on art, and this is the birth of modern art in Madras. The way we see it here on the walls, he is the gentleman who brings in and plants that seed here. I have not mentioned people like Ravi Verma in this context because Ravi Verma does not influence modern art in Madras. He influences modern art in Bombay and other places, but not here. So he is the first person who brings in and plants the seed of modern art. And as you can see, that's a big sculpture he commissioned for the Travancore Maharaja. So he's I mean, very easily comparable to Rodin, you know, of India. His style of work is very similar to Rodin, his quality. He was a bronze master. He was a phenomenal character in himself, right? Because when you want to change art from being this industrial, mass-produced object to something that is individual, egoistic, and you know, on canvas, and you're not painting something for somebody else but yourself, you need to have a personality. You need to be somebody who is powerful to drive ideas, to make change, to influence others, to shift thought, right? Because Roy Chaudhary was somebody like that. He could shift the thought of this entire city. He was at that time, leaders would come and meet him, right? They would get his appointment, come to the college and meet him. He was a wrestler. Imagine, he would have wrestling matches in the college. He would get students to come and fight him, and he would fight, I mean, not in a bad way, but in a very wrestling match kind of way, you know, and people would have parties for him. Like if he was coming to your house, you call your neighborhood, they all come there, they have parties. So it was, he brought in a lot of culture associated with art as we know it today. And this was his very first batch of students. So he's there right in the center. The image actually comes from this artist, Kalasagaram Rajagopal, that gentleman there, who I met when he was 94, just before he died. But this was the first batch from 1934. So he became principal in 1929. The first batch of his students were 1930, and the first batch that graduated was 1934. You can clearly see, I assume there is Panikkar somewhere here, and you know, they were all part of that group. And the women, as you can notice, they were women studying here. There was one European woman, and if you notice, and this is the beginning, and that's why Roy Chaudhary is considered as a marker for the beginning of modern art, is also, have you noticed that there are no Europeans in this picture? So the college has also converted itself into being and serving a very different population. The Europeans are not attending this college for some reason. There's one lady there, but it's become a college of Indian art, and it takes on that identity. It's a huge shift if you understand the importance of what that is. A lot of these women, actually, one of them there is Kamala, who I think married Panikkar, and the other lady was Alagan Kon from Sri Lanka. We don't know what happened to her eventually, but her name comes up as a woman artist. Very few known women artists at the time. And then a lot of them would have been probably artists, a lot of them would have been from the industrial side doing, you know, the other kind of work. But this is what happens, and then Roy Chaudhary, of course, remains principal for a very long time. So he's there from 1929 all the way until 1957, right? So he's there for a good 20 years and producing everybody and anybody that you know of as a modern artist, right? His students were Panikkar to right behind the screen you have the Paul Raj, Tyagaraja, the three brothers, and then you have Krishna Rao, Mukaya, Perumal, they all studied under that gentleman, and it's very rare to see in India. Like even if you look at the other schools of art in this country, you can't associate like some 500 artists to all come out of this one source, this one principle, right? And he is singularly revered. And the last thing, just a little story I want to leave you with to show you how important he was. So when I went and met Kalasagaram Rajagopal, I said, tell me something about Roy Chaudhary, because you're the last man, literally everybody else was dead who physically knew Roy Chaudhary. So I said, tell me something about him. At that point, Kalasagaram had lost all hearing. He couldn't hear anything that I said. So he said, come. So I thought he was taking me somewhere. And he opened his puja room, and there was nothing in it except some 7 photos of Roy Chaudhary, which he worships every day. At the age of 94, he worshipped him that morning, and there was nothing else there. There was not one Lakshmi, Saraswati, Ganesha, nothing. There were 6, 7 photos of Roy Chaudhary in that full puja room, right? So that's the kind of man he was, and that's the influence he left. And next week, I will definitely talk a little bit more about the artistic styles, the influences, where this exhibition comes from. Right? So it now gives you, so you can understand what had happened 2000 years ago when the Romans came here and they were trading for beads, and you know, that was the art of the time. And then you had the Pallavas who came and made these stone sculptures, and then you had the Nayaks who came and built your temples, and then you had Alexander Hunter who came and created this. He picked up all the little bits and pieces of the last 2000 years, and he said, let's enhance them, and you saw how well he did enhance them. If you want to see some of the woodwork, you can go again. Connemara Library is a fantastic example of everything: the architecture, the furniture, the glass, the everything. So, and then of course we come down to the point where all of this changes with the world. India gets independence. everybody's thinking independently, what they're painting is modern in the global sense. So next week we'll talk about modern art, the drive towards modernism, and what happens particularly between Roy Chaudhary in the 1940s and 50s up to about the 1970s. That's where this exhibition, all the artists here, their predominant periods of painting was the 60s and 70s. So I will talk about that, and I'll explain to you how there were multiple thought processes in art, the many art communes that were formed, the many groups of artists, and how today we have come to a point where actually we do not have any, the history of art in Madras sadly and very ominously sounds that way, but looks like it is kind of met a dead end, and we're going to try and see how we're going to restart that, you know, because somewhere in the late 90s it kind of just hit a wall, you know. So there is no art history. There are artists and there are artworks, and there is a lot of art in the city, but we're trying to see how we can further that narrative. So we'll talk about all of this next week. Thank you for enduring me, and if any of you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Again, like last week, I'm running through like 100 years of history in 1 hour. So yeah, so if you have any questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, there is tea and coffee and some watermelon juice. Thank you.